And there's a little optical illusion. It's called chronostasis. That you can test this for yourself. So have you ever looked at if you've got a watch with a second hand?
Yeah.
Sometimes when you look at that watch, or if it's a digital watch, with a second number that's ticking away, if you're looking away and then you look at that clock or that watch,
yeah,
initially it feels like it's stopped.
Yeah.
It seems to hang on that second for longer than it should.
And then and
then it just carries on.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening is your brain is kind of filling in backwards. So again, I think for me it feels like it meets in the middle. You've got a bit of you're processing what you've just seen, and your mind, your brain is making you think that you saw it for a bit longer, which is why that second hand seems to hang on for a little bit longer than it should. Hi, welcome to Matter Over Mind. My name is Stephen. I'm an organisational psychologist, and as always, I have my son-in-law, physicist Thomas. Welcome,
Hello.
Thomas.
How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So do you want to introduce the topic for today?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about now. What is meant by when someone says now. So this is going to be more of a psychology spin on it. Obviously, there's some physics that I've touched on a few times before, but mainly this is a psychology of how we perceive now, or I guess simultaneous events. So I guess, from a physics point of view, this has been mentioned before that if you're in a different frame of reference, you have different unique times in those respective frame of references. And it's only when you have a hypothetical observer at spatial infinity, this sort of omniscient character, that you can define a proper time. So this is a time that connects all these, I guess, subtimes. So we're not going to talk about that.
I was sitting back then. I was getting into that.
Which I can kind of interject with some of this stuff, but that's kind of fairly well documented in terms of time, and essentially how we can have different times is by moving through space. So it's scaled by this gamma term. Basically, you have your time, which how you perceive it, and then time how somebody else is perceiving, moving differently to you. And you basically divide it by 1 minus the ratio of velocities. So 1 minus their speed over the speed of light. So the closer you are to the speed of light, the bigger this denominator term is. Therefore, the more difference or the more deviation the more diluted the time between the two becomes.
So we did touch upon it when we talked about the speed of light, didn't we? But I have a whole bunch of questions to ask around that. But look, let's hold that for a future episode where we can really get our teeth into that. I've got a whole bunch of questions that I want to talk about. But let's tease that. Let's be a tease. We'll come back to that.
Okay, so avoiding the physics discussion for a second. And like I say, some of it will kind of bleed in because they're sort of, I guess, similar.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
But I guess when we say now, I guess how long is now? How long is the minimum span of time we can perceive? If someone says this is happening right now, what's the what's the kind of
what is that time frame
width?
Yeah. So I think just before we start, in a way, I think actually that there's not going to be a lot of overlap in between the physics of this and the psychology of this, because the way that our psychology processes this is very different to the way that a clock does, or any sort of timing device. The simple answer to your question is it's about 2 to 3 seconds. We sort of exist in a 2 to 3 second window, and that's a rolling window of time.
Okay.
And that's that's all the time. So if we were to say, I've just done that now, and what I've just done there, I've just done that thing, and what I've just done there, I've just done that. That's now, and it's a rolling 3 seconds, and that seems to be roughly how our brain sort of considers now. Of course, it's a slippery concept. You never can quite get hold of it, because before you know it, it's gone. So that in itself, philosophically, that's kind of a very strange thing. And I think the first thing to think about are the mechanisms. So probably the easiest way to think about this is 3 main mechanisms. There might be a 4th in there as well, but basically what's happening with our brain is one of these functions is the attention function. So we mentioned going back when we talked about the self in the last season, and I'm going to come back to some of those ideas around attention schema theory and global workspace theory. That's all to do with attention, how our minds pay attention to certain things. We can't pay attention to everything that's going on around us. We don't have enough processing capacity for that. So that's one of the mechanisms that works with this idea of now, and also time. So we'll expand the topic a little bit to think about time in general as well. And so attention is very much so in the present. So if you think about the present, what you're experiencing now, that's really based around your attention processes. Global workspace theory is probably the most popular at the moment. I'll get back to that. And then attention schema theory, which is the one I really like, that helps you understand consciousness. I think that's also there. But this does overlap with consciousness. If you think about it, if you are not conscious, you have no concept of now.
Sure. I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
So it's almost like saying it's the same thing in many respects. Consciousness and a concept of now is, maybe it's the same thing. I don't know to be sure, but that's part of it. And then we have memory encoding. So memories, the way that we encode memory, also plays into how we experience time. So if you think about it, that's another part of understanding now, because if now is only like 3 seconds, then you have to sort of remember what you've been talking about before that. So your memory is part of that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose, if you have an event with no context, anything before that event, who's to say that's now, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so you have to. So that's another one of the mechanisms that helps us understand our place in time as we construct it. So we've got the attention that we are giving to it right now. We've got a memory that we are both encoding and working with. It's called working memory because it's doing work. So it's not just like a videotape that's sort of recording what's going on. It's actually making sense of what's just happened in line with what's happening now. So if you think about when you're listening to somebody talk, you have to remember the words before for that sentence to make any sense. So that's part of the now. And then I suppose predictably, there's the prediction and expectation side of our cognition. So we're now thinking, right, okay, where's this going? What can I expect? What's going to come next? And so we make loads and loads of predictions that we then kind of work with. So that's part of our understanding of now too. And of course, whatever we predicted, that then becomes the thing that's now happening. And most of the time, we're pretty good at predicting that. So we will sort of be right. So listening to music is quite a good example of this. When you're listening to music, when you hear a phrase of music, you obviously you're attending to it at that point. You're listening to it. Your attention is on that, but it only makes sense in the respect that you've heard the notes that have come up to that. Otherwise, they would just be, meaningless sounds. But we all know, even in music that we've not heard before, because we're used to the rules of music, we kind of can anticipate what's coming next in some respects.
Yeah.
And so we kind of, and when we get that, then we kind of, that anticipation works. So that's actually quite often quite a pleasurable feeling, when you're waiting for the drop, you're kind of waiting for that moment, and there it is. And it's kind of, so those, I suppose those three mechanisms we'll keep in mind: attention, memory, and prediction. All of those three things are working together to help us understand what's going on at any given time.
Okay. So do any of these have any bearing on, I guess, just raw processing speed? If someone's just very good at comprehension, does that mean that these, I guess, would work differently for that person, or they would perceive time differently because they can, in principle, comprehend much faster than, say, you or I?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I should caveat that I'm not a neuroscientist, so I am an organisational psychologist, so I'm a bit out of my comfort zone here. From what I've read in preparation for this, and I mean, I'm going back to my undergraduate days as well when we talked about some of this stuff, but I would say that there will be individual differences in relation to how people perceive time, but it is very individualized. So it's almost impossible to compare one with another in many respects. There are some interesting experiments that help us to understand when time seems to slow down or speed up. So I think we should get into that. So I can imagine some people who perhaps are very that their mind is always thinking, asking questions, more engaged with what they're doing. Their perception of time might be slightly different to somebody who is kind of just boringly carrying on with a particular task, and I'll explain that. Whether you can sort of separate that into individual differences, I'm sure you can. Whether we've actually done that, I'm not sure. But that's a good question. Hello, just a quick interruption. As you can see, I'm in editing mode at the moment. I'm just editing one of the latest podcast episodes. Just a quick reminder to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Maybe leave a comment. These are the things that make a difference to how many people get to hear about it, and we want more people to know about the Matter Over Mind podcast. If you're listening on a podcast app, same goes for that. And also, why not let people know? Just send them a text or let them know. If they're into science, then this is kind of a good podcast for them. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we've been asked to have a question and answer episode where we just answer questions that you have. So that means we need questions. We've already got a few in our locker, so please send your questions to us either on the free Facebook group, which I've talked about before, or you can leave comments on the podcast itself. Just let us know what sort of topics are you interested in, and also specific questions. If you've ever thought about this or ever thought about that. I mean, ideally related to psychology or physics. If there's other questions you want to ask, that's fine, and we'll see if we can research some of those things. Maybe even get the odd guest on from time to time. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Back to the podcast. A logical thing to talk about next would be the extension of that, which is our perception of time, how it seems to change. So that maybe that will answer your question a bit more as well, because it could be that some people are more likely to experience time in one way than another. So let's get into that. So if you think about these three elements, particularly the first two, these two processes, so you've got attention and you've got memory. So if I was to say to you, you're doing a task that's got a lot of complication. You're having to do lots of things. You're having to think about it a lot. It's a busy day. You've got a busy task. What tends to happen to your sense of time passing in the moment, would you say?
Well, normally, if your day just disappears. If you've got a lot of tasks, like you say, you actually have to.
Yeah.
If it's, for example, if I'm just plugging numbers into whatever simulation I'm running, and it's just a kind of monotonous one number, press run, wait, okay, next number, press run. That takes forever. Yeah. That feels like the day is just never going to end. But if I'm actually engaged in a proper task and I'm actually outputting useful things, then it tends to be that the day just kind of flies away, and then end of the day before you know it.
Absolutely. So that's very common. That's what we'd expect. So when we're very engaged, when our attention is on tasks or on other things, then we don't notice time passing by. When we don't have a lot to do, and we are then very aware, so we have our attention on time passing, then it feels like it's dragging. So time goes really slow then, or at least it feels like it does. So obviously, from your perspective as a physicist, time is time. It's, obviously, we won't get into all the relativity of it, but the amount of time that passes for me is the same as passes for you in our local area. But as a psychologist, it's not quite the same, So if you're busy, time will pass for you much quicker than if I've got nothing to do. So that's the attention bit. So our attention determines how time passes. But on the other hand, if you think about the memory bit, what seems to happen is when we think back in retrospect, when we think back to what's happened to us, the opposite seems to be true.
Yeah.
So if you've had a lot to do, if you think about last year, wow, what a year. It's just so much. And you'll be able to think about all of that, and it feels like the year was longer than a year that you didn't have much to do. So it's the opposite way about, basically. So this is one of the reasons why when you get older, again, this is something that's been reported, and again, it's hard to know for sure, but from research, it seems that as you get older people report that time passes a lot more quickly.
That makes sense.
So this gives us a clue to something that's going on in relation to the way that we register time or the passing of time after the event. So the clue is that actually the way that human beings count time is not like I like Star Trek, as you know, and there's a character on there called Data who's an artificial life form. He's a robot, basically, an android, I should say. And there's a lovely episode where he's trying to understand how humans experience time, and he's heard the saying that a watched pot never boils. Which again is a good example of, if you're standing there watching it seems to take forever, but as soon as you get distracted by something else, it suddenly happens. And he said, well, he's timed it over and over again, and it's always the same. And so they ask him, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm checking my internal chronometer. And they said, well, humans don't have an internal chronometer. So why don't you switch it off and see what happens? And of course, that's suddenly it boils. And I think that's a really insightful little scene in that program, because that's absolutely right. So we don't have internal chronometers. We don't have a single kind of clock that is sort of ticking. We have various different cycles and things that happen, but they're not like clocks. So we tend to judge time in terms of cognitive load and the amount of novel experiences that we've had. So if you have lots of novel experiences, then you'll think that took a lot longer. Whereas if you have no novel experiences, that you're not registering anything, then it'll feel like time went a lot more quickly, which I think is really interesting.
Interesting. So could it be that obviously while you're doing a lot of tasks or you've had a busy weekend or whatever,
Yeah.
you've put your attention on a lot of things. So your attention is spread 10 ways, so to say, and then I guess at the time it's happening, that's just binned as one bit of data, and then when you look into it, it's distributed. It's sort of split up in 10 sub data. But if you've only done one thing all weekend, you've just stayed at home and done nothing, your attention is still looking at one block. Or I guess when you look back on it, there's just one block. And then when it's stored, it's kind of condensed. It is zip filed, I guess. But the zip file where you've done not a lot has just one file in it, which is just sat at home doing nothing. But then the zip file of the busy weekend, you go in, there's 10 files now. Could it be something like that? So your attention is split up, so there is no attention on not doing anything. And then when you store it, that's when you look back and actually, there's a lot here. So it takes longer to sift
pretty
through
much.
it.
Yeah, so you will perceive that as being a longer time period because you've just done a lot more things. So we don't measure time, we infer it essentially. So we infer time. If we're looking back again, this is to do with. So don't forget, we've got these different mechanisms: attention, what's going on right now, but then we have to encode it into memory. So that's why it's different. So for attention, lots to do means time goes fast in the moment, but when it's encoded into memory, your memory is inferring how much time went by based on the amount of things that happened.
Yeah.
So if 20 things happen to you, then your inference is, there's more time there because 20 things happen instead of 2 things.
Yeah.
So that's why when you look back on life, older people who talk about, all the things they've done in their lives, they will, for them, their life will have stretched out, for feeling like a lot longer than somebody who's just, done nothing with their lives and just sort of, I don't know, watch TV all the time.
Yeah.
So one of the bits of advice, I suppose, is quite good. If you want to feel like you've got a long life, then do a lot of things, because you will have so many more memories to draw on, and that it extends time. Basically, it stretches it out, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Go on. You got a question?
Yeah, I was going to say that sort of leads on, I guess, quite nicely to the thing. I mean, you kind of mentioned it already, but as a kid, the summer holidays feels like forever.
Yes.
That feels basically the same length as your school term. But now, if you had 6 weeks off, that would just vanish in no time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the kind of way I sort of rationalise that is, if I'm 10 years old, 1 year is 10% of my life. Now, 1 year is a significantly smaller percentage of my life. So it is a smaller bit. So 1 year is less to me, even if it's the same amount of time, because percentage-wise, it's a lot smaller to me. So I guess, how does that kind of wrap in with this?
Yeah, that is, I suppose, a complementary theory, if not an alternative one. So there is that, but that would be more of a very sort of conscious cognitive assessment of your life, wouldn't it? You're thinking about the percentage of your life that's passed and so on. So I think, and that's probably a part of it, I think, and it is one of the theories that's offered as to why we have this phenomenon. So I think it's not wrong. I think that will definitely add to it. So there is a percentage element, but I think the leading theory is that when you're young, you're experiencing lots of new, emotionally rich, lots of interesting things are happening to you. It's called the memory density theory, basically. This, so your memories are you're encoding new things all the time. The first time you I don't know, went to the beach, when you went to the pictures, when you had a different chocolate treats. All these things are new. You're experiencing, going to school for the first time. It's not just going to school. This is the first time that you've ever been with other kids, possibly, other than, perhaps in a more informal way. So all of these are new memories, new. And so when you look back on them, it seems like, wow, that's a lot has happened during that period. But again, if you think about children in the moment, when it's playtime, time to go out and play, if playtime's 20 minutes, they can't believe it. Is it time to come? It's not time to come in yet, is it? Because they're really having fun. Their attention is on other things. So in the moment, that time flies. But when memories are encoded, it's then, you're looking back afterwards. So I think it's really important to be aware that we have these two different mechanisms going on, and they both play tricks with us, really. So we are not necessarily perceiving time in the same way, even when it's happening to us. So here's an interesting question. So I guess you've heard these stories of when people have been involved in road traffic accidents or something like that, and they've said that time seemed to slow down. So they talk about it afterwards. They realised they were just about to fall off their motorbike, or they were falling off their bike, or they were coming head-on collision with another car, and they say how time seemed to just slow down. It was all in slow motion. Yeah. So go on.
So, I mean, that's, well, hopefully a fairly novel situation for most people, if you get into that. So that would, I guess, imply that it should feel like it's quicker because it's a new event or something that doesn't happen enough. It's distinct. And it's not, so by the same rules as before, it's not until you'd look back on it that would maybe feel like a long time. But instantaneously in the time, it's kind of inverse. So why?
You got it.
Yeah.
Why that's it, exactly. So I think that's really interesting, because I must admit, I always used to think it's because, our body pumps adrenaline around, and we have this, essentially our reactions are quicker because we have increased adrenaline and we're sort of ready for action. And that's what's happening. It's because we have increased reaction time, then time is naturally going to feel like it's slower. But there's a really interesting experiment that a guy called David Eagleman did called the free fall study. So what he did, he got they must have had a lot of safety stuff going on, because he took these participants to up on a high level, a high shelf, and he hit 150-foot tower, basically. So he took them up onto a 150-foot tower, and he got them to fall backwards. Brave people fall backwards from this tower in a controlled free fall. Obviously, there was a safety net and a harness and everything. Nobody died, as far as I know. So they're going backwards, and then they must have had some goggles on or something. But there was in these goggles, they were flashing a visual display, so flashing lights, and they had to report how many times the lights were flashing. So and what they did is they had the lights flash quicker than our normal reaction time. So whatever that flash per second is, there's a point at which you wouldn't notice the flash anymore, and they wanted to see whether there was a point at which, when you were in this high sort of feeling of high risk, obviously you weren't going to die, but you couldn't help but feel high adrenaline then, and high emotion, so it should kick in at that point. So would people be able to spot these flashes now they were undergoing this high stress, high adrenaline experiment? And really interestingly, the answer is no. They didn't see any more flashes.
Interesting.
So in real time, their reaction time didn't increase. They were just the same. They didn't get Matrix style super powers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were just the same. But when they look back on it, of course, they reported that they felt like it was going on forever. So they had the same sensation, but that was only in retrospect. So I think that's really interesting. So I think we have to be. It's useful to know that. So if we're in a road traffic accident or something, I suppose the only thing we say is avoid them.
Yeah, because you're not
take risks because you haven't got superpowers. Which I think is really interesting. So
interesting,
they call it time dilation. It's generally called time dilation. Is a memory effect, not a perception effect. So it's only in retrospect that we feel that. Any of our listeners, I'd be really interested in hearing from you if you've had an experience like that. What your thoughts are about that. That might be quite difficult to hear if you're convinced, this thing happened and this is what I experienced. But I'd be really interested in your sort of
that's
observations about that.
So thinking of one, to me, I guess, where this happened, which, so those listeners maybe don't know, but I used to work in a kitchen. I used to be a chef before deciding to pursue physics. And there's this one time I cut my finger reasonably badly. And I remember after it happened thinking, I watched myself do that. My finger was in the way and I wasn't even going that quickly. And I just sliced into it. But now you're saying that maybe I wasn't going slowly. Maybe I was chopping at the normal speed I would normally go at. But obviously, cutting your finger generally isn't too pleasant. But I remember so clearly. I was moving very slowly and I just didn't want to move out of the way. But that's interesting.
That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's a really good example of it, actually. Yeah, it's a really good example of it. Why would you not move it out of the way? You know what I mean? If it was that slowly, you would, wouldn't you? Yeah. So I think that is an example of it. Now there can be kind of, this is complex. So there's cases where things don't seem to quite work like that. So when I was talking about this to Sarah, my wife, she was talking about when she was giving birth. And she remembers looking at the clock. But again, this is obviously in hindsight, so it's interesting. Could it be that she's just remembering it differently? But she does remember looking at that clock in the delivery room, and it was just stood still. It was not moving, But obviously she was in pain, and it was very emotional, and obviously lots going on. But if you kind of stick with the attention element of it, then you'd expect that it would have gone faster for her. But maybe again, it's probably a retrospective thinking back to that. Although there are some situations where time really plays tricks, and so in highly emotional, highly painful situations, you tend to get not so much dilation but distortion. So time seems to, it doesn't seem to sit together very well. It's kind of disjointed. And again, that can be if you're in intense pain, or if you're in a fever. Sometimes I remember having some sorts of bug and being really hot, having a fever, and it's like your concept of time is a bit screwed up then. So it's not always obvious, but as a general rule, that's kind of what you're looking at, which is kind of interesting.
So just talking about it's in retrospect that you, I guess, notice this stretching of time, but how close can two events be before that starts to kick in? So suppose you're in like a car accident or something, but maybe it's like an ongoing, maybe it's like a series of, you hit something and someone hits behind you and it's a bit of a pile-up situation. So could it be that, the first bump happens, bam, then the second bump happens, and then you recall the first bump happening in slow time, but by the time you've, I guess, registered that, then you kind of, you're kind of lagging behind now, so everything kind of stretches. Is that a thing that could happen? So you're kind of having multiple. Yeah.
Yeah, don't forget that your perception of now is this 2 to 3 seconds, but it's rolling. So you're always laying down new memories. You're experiencing it. You're laying down new memories. Your working memory is also trying to piece together everything. So it's working hard. So working memory is trying to make sense of what's just happened, this bang, the physical sensation of the inertia and the hitting your head or your seatbelt against you and your airbag. All these things are going to be happening, and your attention is working hard to register all this stuff. So it's basically part of your process is, if new stuff is happening, you're trying to register it and also make sense of it at the same time. So attention, very, very busy. Your memory is also very, very busy trying to encode all this stuff. So yeah, it would, if it lasts 2 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, I would suggest that all of that, you would experience the same sensations in that. Another thing just to think about, which is another interesting thing, I think does relate to time, is that, again, we're trying to piece together what's happening, and our mind, our senses, they're all kind of working together to create a model or a picture of what's happening. So a good example of this is something called saccades. Have you heard of saccades? I hadn't heard of it before.
No, I've not heard of this.
So saccades are when you look around. So if you just look from one place to another, if you think about what's happening with your eyes?
I guess there's a frame and then I'm moving my eyes at some speed.
That's right.
Then there's essentially a refresh rate on my eyes, like you would on a TV screen.
So have you ever wondered why you don't see like a blur? If you have a camera and you move it from one place to another quickly, what do you see?
You see the two images kind of overlapped. You get a blur. You get
a blur, don't you? Well, you actually see the camera pan from one to the other, and if you move it quickly, then it's just really fast. But you do see the camera moving from one frame to the next, or from one object to the next. So you see that kind of zoom, or this shump as you go from one thing to the next. But you never see that with your eyes.
No.
So what's happening is your brain takes that out. Essentially, you're blind. So we're blind for a big percentage of the day, a huge percentage of the day. We are completely blind. Our brain is just filtering that out. But we don't notice that because our brain essentially hides it from us. So it clips what we were seeing in the passage of time into the next thing that we see.
Okay.
So if our eyes were like a camera, you'd move from one image to the next. If you wanted to do away with that horrible movement of the camera, you'd cut it, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And then
you'd cut the film and squish them together. But we can't do that because it's live.
Yeah.
So what has to happen is the brain has to piece together what you were looking at and make you believe that you're still seeing that until you've alighted on the next thing. And that's the thing that you're looking at now. So it kind of meets in the middle somewhere. But you don't see a black, you don't see nothing. It looks like, in your brain, it looks like you've seen one thing, then you've seen the next thing. Therefore, it must be extending what you're physically seeing. Your brain is extending that to fill in the gap. Otherwise, you'd have little black moments as you move from one view to the next.
which
Isn't
would
that
probably be
amazing?
quite, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because when thinking about things happening in short time frames, a lot of the cameras I use at work, they're not
Yeah.
kind of commercial cameras. They're really super high speed cameras. So they're photographing things that happen on nanosecond timescales, for example. But there are still there's some portion of that that's called time integrated. Basically, it's the what's it called? The exposure time. There is an amount of time from, I guess, when the shutter opens to when it closes that it's absorbing light that whole time, and then the image is essentially averaged over time zero and then
Yeah.
time close. It's averaging across it. So I guess what you're saying is that isn't happening. It's almost instantaneous, and then you just, I guess, splining them together.
Well, in a way, it is happening because your brain has to fill in. Just think of it like that.
Yeah.
Your brain is filling in the black bits. If your brain is saying, right, Thomas doesn't want to see a horrible blur, because it make you feel sick. Actually, it would make you feel a bit. What's the word? Vertigo, is it? You'd have this sense of sickness. So you're not. Your brain is basically saying Thomas doesn't want to see what the eyes are picking up in between frames. So you look at one side of the room, and without moving your head, just move your eyes. Look to another part of the room. You don't notice that movement, whereas you should, because it's there.
Yeah.
So your brain cuts that out. But it can't splice the two bits together because that physical time wouldn't work with that, would it? You have got that space in between. So your brain is compensating for that by filling it in.
But what's it filling it in with?
With what you just saw.
Okay, so I'm looking at... Okay.
If you look at the light bulb now, look at the light bulb, and then look away and look at something else.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you saw the light bulb, and then you saw the next thing you were looking at.
Yeah.
So if you were perceiving exactly what your eyes are seeing, then you would have seen the blur as your eyes move from one thing to another, but you didn't see that. You just saw the light bulb, and then you saw the next thing. So your brain is basically making you think you're seeing the light bulb for longer than you actually are.
Okay. And
the next perception is the thing you're actually looking at now.
I see. Okay, so basically it's just my memory now is storing that image until I guess the process has completed its cycle. Oh, now I can look at the new thing, and it just turns off, and
that's
the
right.
new one comes in.
That's right. So that's what's happening, and there's a little optical illusion. It's called chronostasis. That you can test this for yourself. So have you ever looked at if you've got a watch with a second hand?
Yeah.
Sometimes when you look at that watch, or if it's a digital watch, with a second number that's ticking away, if you're looking away and then you look at that clock or that watch, initially it feels like it stopped. It seems to hang on that second for longer than it should.
And then and
then it just carries on.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening is your brain is kind of filling in backwards. So again, I think for me it feels like it meets in the middle. You've got a bit of you're processing what you've just seen, and your mind, your brain is making you think that you saw it for a bit longer, which is why that second hand seems to hang on for a little bit longer than it should, and that's to do with this this effect that we have, the saccadic eye movements. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
but I think you have to include that. Yeah,
So
yeah,
on the recorder here, there's a timer, and I just tested. I
yeah,
just looked at 23 stayed for
yeah.
longer than the other ones.
It's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a little test you can do for yourself, which I think is amazing, really. Okay, so where do we go next? There's a couple of interesting things that I'll throw at you that we can cover for the next sort of 4 or 5 minutes because we're getting close to our time. But basically, the brain has what's called temporal response windows. So these are different regions of the brain that open up various different processes or processing resources for different amounts of time. So there's a bit of a hierarchy here. So you've got a part of your brain. I will say what they are, but you don't need to remember these. I've got them written down in my notes because I can't remember them. But there's the primary auditory cortex, and this is a part of your brain that I think it's on the left side of your brain, temporal area, milliseconds. So this is registering milliseconds. So your brain is processing very, very short time periods. So this is a lot to do with audio. So very short sounds and phonemes. So, sort of the phonemes of our speech would be a good way to think about this. So f, t, oh, the actual sounds of our speech, that's being registered in the primary auditory cortex. Then you've got the next level is seconds, the superior temporal gyrus, and that would register things like words, syllables, those sorts of things. So that's where you're starting to piece these other bits together. But again, that's another part of the brain that is processing that. And then you've got the posterior parietal prefrontal cortex, and that's a bit longer. So we're looking at tens of seconds now. And this is where you might put together phrases, sentences, chunks of meaning and so on. And then the really interesting part is called the default mode network. So this isn't just a region, this is a network. So one of the things that you do learn when you're doing some work on the brain, when you're learning about it, is we tend to, the old-fashioned way of thinking about the brain is, there's this region that does this, and there's this region that does that. And there are some slightly specialized regions, but there's lots of processes that cut across all over, and they're more networks of regions, and they activate. And this is called the default mode network. And this is where, do you remember when we talked about the self and so we said there was consciousness, which was all around attention. And we looked at attention schema theory for that. And that gives rise to this sense of consciousness. But then we talked about the self being a story. So the story, it's the thing we tell ourselves. It's the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And that is all to do with this default mode network. So it makes sense of what's happening to us. Narratives, context around what's happened and how that fits into our understanding of the world. And that's how we kind of then make sense of all of that, and we tell a story about it. So if we're talking about, what happened over my lifetime as an old person, I can look back and think, oh, this is what happened. That year was a really big year, seemed to go on forever, blah, 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 blah. That's the default mode network that's telling that story. But it's building upon all these other ways that the brain processes time, which I think is fascinating.
Okay, and so that would be the largest amount of time. So you said there's the sort of millisecond scale, the second scale.
Yeah.
So is this the bulk scale, or can it also process faster?
The big picture, but it's also responsible for self-referential thinking. So it's also where the story of me lives. It's myself, I would say. I might be claiming stronger than some would, but in my view, this is where the self sort of lives. This
Okay.
is the sense of self. This is the narrative self, the self you talk about yourself. This is who I am. This is my identity. This is why I think like I do. This is all of that. And this is your sense of who you are as a person. And it's an internal mode. So it's remember we talked about this belief, this sort of false belief that we have like a mini me inside of us, this
Yeah.
homunculus that is like driving the bus. Well, we don't have that, but we do have this default mode network, which essentially gives rise to this sense of me as a person existing through time and space, who has an individual personality, wants, needs, some of them fulfilled, some of them not, goals for the future, all of these relationships. These are all partly to do with this sense of who I am, my identity, and my sense of self, which I think is very interesting. And again, this is related to time, because there's a state of attention called flow state. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, like with athletes and what have you.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, I mean, you're a martial artist, so maybe you've experienced that with some of your the processes you go through when you're doing certain exercises or you're doing certain moves. You get into this flow state. What happens when you're in that? Can you describe that?
I guess so. I suppose it's a good point. I don't really tend to think about it too much while it's happening, but I guess a good example of where I notice that sort of thing. So me and Selena go to the gym fairly regularly, and in the gym we have like a heavy bag. So I've been showing her some moves. And so I'll demo a technique. I'm like, okay, you just do this and this and this. And then when I'm explaining, I guess breaking down the thing I've just done. So suppose I've thrown a punch, and I'm like, okay, I've done this with my hips, I've done this with my upper body, I've rolled my shoulder over, so on and so on. Well, there's a lot of processes there, but I'm also actively thinking about doing them while it's happening. But I guess if I watch a recording of myself or whatever else, it's happening very quickly. But I'm consciously making the decision to do those things, especially when I'm demoing. But in reality, if I had to, say I was typing something or describing a thing, I wouldn't be able to describe it fast enough before it's already happened. But I must be perceiving it fast enough to consciously be like, okay, I need to turn my body in this way and then do this, and my foot's in the wrong place, I've got to do this. It's kind of almost happening too quickly for me to be able to notice, but I do notice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's I suppose there's a fuzzy line between unconscious competence, if you like, sort of doing something as an expert without thinking about it, going into autopilot, and this flow state, which tends to be something a bit more than just that. So it's not something everybody experiences very often, So I would say when I used to go cycling a lot, there would be times when I'd experience that because it's very rhythmic. There's not much else going on, and you're just, you're very much in the moment. So a flow state is when you get into that moment, and it's normally when you're doing a fairly repetitive task, or you're following a set of actions that you're not thinking about anymore at all, and you're just, you're really in the zone is another way of calling it, I suppose. But Mihai Csikszentmihalyi came up with this impossible name. He was a Hungarian American psychologist, but he came up with this idea of flow. And what happens then, so when athletes report experiencing flow, or people that have experienced it, then the selfhood, meditation is also like this apparently. Your sense of selfhood gets reduced.
Okay.
So you stop noticing yourself, which means that your DMN, your default mode network, is basically being suppressed or being relaxed. So you're not doing the self-referential thinking anymore. You're just in the moment. You are completely in the moment. That thing's happening, but you're not thinking about it. So it's when you're attending to something, but you're not aware of that attention. And you get into this state of flow. And what tends to happen there is that, again, time, you have no concept of time. So when you've stopped, you don't really know how long that's been. You lose your sense of time. So I think that's interesting because it suggests that our concept of time is very wrapped up in our sense of self. Because when you suppress that, either through drugs, say, people who've used LSD or other sorts of hallucinatory drugs, can't say that. Meditation can have the same effect, or getting into the state of flow, it reduces this sense of self, suppresses the default mode network, and you stop noticing the passage of time. There's some people that go on these retreats where they have a silent retreat for days, weeks, even months, and they literally sit in a room. Obviously, they must eat and drink, but other than that, they do nothing. And essentially, they're trying to reach this state. And those that are successful don't, time didn't drag for them because they've essentially suppressed this sense of self. So I think that gives a clue that time, our sense of time and our sense of self are very much, if not the same, they're part of each other, I guess. Kind of interesting.
So our own mental reference frame with a unique time. There's no proper mental time. It's unique to each person.
Yeah, so this is, let's finish off with the quote I was going to say right at the beginning. It sounds like a good time to use it. William James, sort of hero of I suppose, psychology. A psychologist before there was such a thing as psychology. He called it the specious present is the prototype of all conceived times, the short duration of which we are immediately and incessantly sensible. So he called it a specious present in the respect that it's kind of fallacious. It doesn't really exist. We make it up. So there are some philosophers who think that time is entirely a construct, that it is just something that we make up, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I agree with that, but yeah, it's...
yeah, well, I wouldn't expect to as a physicist, but on that bombshell...
Yes.
That's probably it for the day, for the session. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting topic. If you've had experiences about this as a listener, let us know. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this. Other than that, don't forget to like, subscribe. We're on YouTube now, so check us out on YouTube and give us some feedback. That would be great. Give us some suggestions for some topics you want us to cover. Until next time, bye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.